the White House has always been more than a building. It is a stage upon which the balance of power has been revealed, challenged, and reshaped across generations. From the earliest days of the 19th century to the upheavals of the 20th, it has carried the weight of wars and settlements, alliances and betrayals. Now, in the middle of the third decade of the 21st century, its walls once again hold the echoes of a gathering that seeks to redirect the trajectory of Europe itself. The war in Ukraine, stretching into its fourth year, has entered a phase of exhaustion without resolution, the dead number in the hundreds of thousands, and the displaced in the millions. And yet on this day, the claim is made that peace may be within reach if the forces assembled here can align both their ambitions and their compromises. President Donald Trump frames the summit not as ceremony, but as strategy. He speaks in stark terms. Thousands are dying each week, 5,000, 6,000, sometimes 7,000. The goal, he insists, is simple: stop the killing, bring the war to an end. He references indirect communication with Vladimir Putin and a willingness to convene a trilateral meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. He offers himself as mediator, even participant, in talks that could shape not only Ukraine's survival but the stability of Europe. In his telling, this could be the most consequential negotiation since the Second World War. Around him sit leaders who collectively embody the political weight of Europe. The Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the United Kingdom, President Emmanuel Macron of France, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni of Italy, Chancellor Friedrich Merz of Germany, President Alexander Stubb of Finland, President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen. Their presence in Washington signals not only solidarity with Ukraine, but a recognition that the United States remains the indispensable broker when Europe faces existential crisis. The symbolism of this meeting is powerful, but symbolism without substance has failed before. Europe has seen grand declarations in Versailles, Yalta, Potsdam, and Dayton, each framed as historic, each accompanied by promises of enduring peace. Yet history teaches that words at the table only matter if they are matched by power on the ground. The war in Ukraine is not an abstraction. It is artillery, trenches, drones, and attrition. It is shattered cities and broken supply chains. Any diplomatic arrangement must rest on military reality, and that reality is brutal. Russia occupies swathes of Ukrainian territory. Ukraine resists but cannot dislodge entrenched Russian forces. Western aid sustains the defense, but questions of endurance loom. Here, the concept of security guarantees emerges as central. Trump insists that Putin has signaled willingness to accept such guarantees for Ukraine, a potential breakthrough, if true. Zelensky echoes that the United States and its allies must provide them. The European leaders support the idea, framing it as essential not only for Ukraine, but for the credibility of European security as a whole. What does this mean in practice? It means moving towards something that resembles Article 5 of NATO, the principle that an attack on one is an attack on all, without granting full NATO membership. A layered guarantee that blends military aid, defensive commitments, and deterrence. The challenge is immense. For Moscow, such guarantees may be tolerated only if coupled with territorial concessions. For Kyiv, territorial concessions are politically poisonous, yet survival may demand them. For Washington and Brussels, the calculus is how to end the war without inviting its resumption. To design a guarantee that deters Russia without formalizing Ukraine as NATO's 33rd member. To balance deterrence with diplomacy. This is the needle that must be threaded. Historical precedent weighs heavily here. After the First World War, security guarantees were promised to France but not credibly enforced, paving the way for German rearmament. After the Second World War, guarantees were institutionalized through NATO, creating a shield that endured. The failure of the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, in which Ukraine surrendered nuclear weapons in exchange for vague assurances from Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom, looms as a cautionary tale. The lesson is clear. Security guarantees that are ambiguous invite aggression. Guarantees that are credible deter it. This is why the Europeans stress unity. Macron insists the security of the entire continent is at stake. Starmer highlights that every European community has felt the war's impact. Stubb invokes Finland's Winter War of 1939, when his nation fought and bled against overwhelming Russian power and the lessons it left for modern Europe. Von der Leyen points to abducted Ukrainian children, framing the war as not only geopolitical but moral. Each voice seeks to project resolve. Yet, behind closed doors, divisions remain. Some leaders favor a ceasefire as prerequisite to negotiations. Trump pushes back, reminding them that in 6 prior conflicts he mediated, ceasefires were unnecessary. He cites Congo, where a 31-year war ended without one. He references another conflict that lasted 35 years before resolution. For him, ceasefire is optional. Settlement is imperative. The strategic question, therefore, is this: can the war be ended without freezing the lines of battle into permanent borders? Can Ukraine secure its sovereignty without reclaiming all occupied territory? Can Russia retreat from maximalist goals without appearing humiliated? And can the United States engineer an agreement that satisfies Kyiv, restrains Moscow, and binds Europe to new commitments? Part of the answer lies in military stalemate. Ukraine cannot easily break through Russian defenses, even with Western equipment. Russia cannot easily advance beyond current positions, even with its mobilized reserves. Both sides bleed, but neither can decisively win. This is precisely the environment where diplomacy becomes possible. Wars often end not when one side achieves total victory, but when both sides recognize further fighting yields diminishing returns. Yet, recognition does not guarantee resolution. Domestic politics intrude. In Kyiv, Zelensky faces a nation weary of war, but resistant to concession. In Moscow, Putin must frame any settlement as victory, not retreat. In Washington, Trump must demonstrate that his strategy achieves what his predecessor could not: a decisive end to the war. In Europe, leaders must reassure publics that their sacrifices for Ukraine were not wasted. These are the pressures that complicate negotiation. Trump's insistence that European nations shoulder more of the burden signals a structural shift. He notes that NATO contributions have risen from 2% to 5% of gross domestic product, a massive change. He emphasizes that Europe, not America alone, must guarantee Ukraine's future. This aligns with his broader doctrine of transactional burden sharing. The United States remains central, but allies must carry weight proportionate to their interests. The deeper question is whether this represents a new architecture of European security. Since 1949, NATO has been the cornerstone. But the possibility of a trilateral or even quadrilateral arrangement, with Ukraine as the pivot, suggests experimentation. If successful, it could set a precedent for conflict management beyond NATO's formal structures. If it fails, it could reveal NATO's limits and embolden adversaries elsewhere. The stakes ripple outward. For China, watching closely, the outcome in Ukraine signals the credibility of Western commitments in Asia. For Iran and North Korea, it demonstrates whether defiance of international norms is punished or rewarded. For the consistency. In other words, Ukraine is not only about Ukraine, it is about the credibility of the entire post-Second World War order. As the summit proceeds, each leader frames the stakes in their own language, but the underlying message converges. Unity is necessary. Security guarantees are essential. Prisoner exchanges and humanitarian relief cannot be neglected. And above all, time is short. Trump warns that in a week or two, the window of opportunity may close. Stubb reminds that history shows solutions can be found, citing 1944 as precedent. Macron insists on a quadrilateral dimension, expanding beyond trilateral. Starmer calls for an outcome that will be judged historic. Meloni emphasizes justice and unity. Von der Leyen stresses the moral imperative of returning children. Each piece contributes to the mosaic. And yet, beneath the unity, fault lines remain. Will Ukraine cede territory? Will Russia accept limited guarantees? Will Europe invest in deterrence long-term? These questions cannot be answered in one meeting, no matter how grand. But the meeting reveals that conditions are shifting. For the first time since 2022, Russia signals openness. For the first time, Ukraine openly contemplates settlement terms. For the first time, Europe sits collectively in Washington to negotiate peace in Europe. These are not trivial developments. The global implications stretch further still. If successful, Trump could claim a diplomatic breakthrough on par with Camp David in 1978 or Dayton in 1995. If it fails, the war continues, and the credibility of Western diplomacy erodes. Either outcome reshapes perceptions of American power. As the summit closes, Trump projects confidence. He claims both sides are willing. He predicts a good outcome is possible. He promises to give it his best. The leaders prepare to depart, to brief their nations. The media are thanked for fairness, itself a sign of the high stakes. But the real test is yet to come. The real test will be in whether words translate into commitments and commitments into peace. For now, the White House has staged an unprecedented moment, a gathering that could mark the beginning of the end of the war in Ukraine, or simply another chapter in Europe's long history of deferred peace. And so, the narrative shifts to the next step, the trilateral meeting, the possible quadrilateral expansion, the crafting of security guarantees, the negotiations over territory, the return of prisoners and children, the prevention of renewed aggression. Each element must be aligned. Each failure risks collapse. This is the cold arithmetic of diplomacy in 2025. The White House has hosted many summits before. Some ended wars, some failed. This one carries the weight of both possibilities. The question is whether history will record it as the moment the killing stopped, or as another missed chance in the catalog of conflicts unresolved.